Study Section 4, Phonological Theories 2. Introduction. In the previous lecture, we discussed what phonological theory is and specifically focused on classical phonemics. In this study section, we shall discuss generative phonology, which is a major departure from classical phonemics in terms of the perception of the phoneme, which was central to classical phonemics, as well as other areas. Learning outcome for study section 4. When you are studying this section, you should be able to define and use correctly all of the keywords printed in bold. Discuss the concern of generative phonology. Identify the differences between classical phonemics and generative phonology. Discuss the underlying (phonemic) and surface phonetics. Level of representation. Differentiate between dictionary transcriptions and real rule affected pronunciation. 1. Generative phonology. Previously, we were made to know that phonological theories, as with theories in other fields of study, have some relationships. Most times, a latter theory is a reaction to a previous one. It could be agreeing with the ideas, but adding new opinions or totally disagreeing with the previous theory. For instance, generative phonology, though recognizing the phoneme, disagree with viewing the phoneme as an irreducible entity. The view of classical phonemics. To generative phonologists, the phoneme is a bundle of phonetics features and a consequence reducible to its phonetic features. Despite the fact that classical phonemics span over a period of time, generative phonology affected its basic tenets, such that views change in relation to the study of human sound patterning till today. The term generative was first introduced into linguistics from mathematics by Noam Chomsky in 1957, and later in 1965. The concept generative, from the verb to generate, is used to describe a specific group of grammars which aims by a set of finite rules to describe and generate all possible grammatical sentences of a language. A central belief of generative grammarians is that humans have a finite set of linguistic resources, which makes it possible for them to produce and understand an infinite number of utterances. We can then define generative phonology as a component of generative grammar that assigns the correct phonetic representation to utterances in such a way as to reflect a native speaker's internalized grammar. This major change in the theory of phonology came about in the 1960s due to the fact that many people became convinced that important facts about the sound system of languages were being missed by phonologists because they concentrated mainly in the identification of phonemes and the analysis of relationships between them. Generative phonologists such as Maurice Hale, later joined by Noam Chomsky, were able to substantiate their claims that there were many sound processes which, observable in the phonology, are actually regulated by grammar and morphology. This is a major deviation from classical phonemics because any relationship outside phonemes and their phonetic family, i.e., allophones of the phoneme, was not given attention by classical phoneticists. However, generative phonologists discovered that some sounds which do not shared phonetic relationships relate in other contexts. Let us look at the following examples. In slash, I and I, as in divine, divine, and divinity. Long I and air, as in serene and serenity. This set of pure vowels and diphthongs had previously not received any attention as related. However, a pattern has been seen in word pairs such as divine and divinity, serene and serenity, profane and profanity. It has been observed that there are alternations that form part of what English native speakers know about their language. This requires, according to generative phonologists, explanations that may not be coming from phonology, but from grammar and morphology. Note, same is observable between she and air, as in demolish and demolition. ITQ form more examples of the above. Also, classical phonemic theory would see no phonetic relationship between the K and S phonemes. Yet, a regular pattern referred to as alternation has been observed between the two phonemes in word pairs, such as the following. Electric, electricity. Toxic, toxicity. Since the pattern is regular and phonology is about patterns in languages, explanations should be made for such alternations. Since the explanations cannot be found in phonology due to the two sounds not being phonetically related, generative phonologists will seek explanations in grammar and morphology. Generative phonology therefore recognizes two levels for sounds. There is a more abstract, unobservable, underlying phonological form where phonemes are located, and the physically observable surface, strings of sounds that we hear. These are phones, real sounds. Furthermore, if such alternations, such as it affects ha and ah in the word divine and divinity, are accepted as a proper part of phonology, then it becomes essential to write rules that state how the alternations work. This will lead us to rules, i.e., phonological rules, which are basic concerns of generative phonology. To generative phonologists, these rules must regulate such changes as substitutions, deletions, and insertions of sounds in specific contexts. Therefore, rules are recognized required explanations for regular phonological processes such as deletion, insertion, substitution in particular languages. We shall discuss these rules fully later. It is just good to mention them here. Furthermore, generative phonologists did not stop at defining or stating the rules, but also involved an elaborate method of writing these rules in an algebra-like manner. This is called formalization of rules. For example, a rule of B deletion in certain English words. When B occurs after M, is stated as delete B. When it occurs after the voiceless nasal M, the rule can be formalized as B. M means changes to, theta means null, i.e. nothing, means in the environment of, stands for the position of the sound that is going in the process, B. Hash stands for word boundary. When we get to the lecture on formalization of rules, You understand the symbol and what they mean better. Please note that one of the best known generative phonological treatments of English is the book The Sound Pattern of English, written by Chomsky and Ale in 1968. It is also good to always remember that the generative approach to phonological made an impact on the general view on phonology because it made phonology to become more technical. With the development of generative phonology, mathematical concepts become very vital to a discussion of phonology. Let's talk briefly about the crucial components of generative phonology. These are the level of phonological representation, phonological rules, derivation, and distinctive features. Generative phonology posits two levels of phonological representation, which are 1. Underlying phonemic level of representation. 2. Surface phonetic level of representation. The underlying phonemic level of representation is the most basic form of a word before the application of phonological rules. This level shows what a native speaker knows about the abstract underlying phonology of his language. On the other hand, the surface phonetic level of representation is a form of the word that is actually spoken or heard. Between these two levels are phonological rules. P rules. When P rules apply on the abstract form of the word, they realize the real word. P rules delete, insert, or change segments, or change the features of segments. Distinctive features make it possible to capture the generalities of phonological rules. We shall talk about distinctive features very soon. However, generative phonology has now been largely succeeded by newer approaches to phonology, many of which, despite rejecting or amending the theory of the sound pattern of English, are still viewed as deriving from it. This is because they are based on the principle of an abstract, underlying phonological representation of speech, which needs rules to convert it into phonetic realizations. This is the tenet of generative phonology. Level of representation. Generative phonology recognizes two levels of representation in languages. These are phonemic, underlying level of representation, and phonetic, surface level of representation. Between these two levels are the phonological rules, P rules of a language, which serves as interface between the two levels. However, it is good to mention at this junction that some linguists believe that this two-level model does not account for the intuition of a native speaker about the pronunciation of the words of each of our language. The belief is that the underlying representation appears to be too abstract, while the surface representation seems to be too detailed. This level is recognized in lexical phonology and referred to as lexical representation. However, considering your present level and the nature of our discussion, we shall restrict ourselves to the two levels recognized in Chomsky and Ale's generative phonology: phonemic, underlying level of representation, and the phonetic, surface level of representation. The units of phonemic descriptions are phonemes, while the units of phonetic descriptions are phones. The phonemic units are transcribed between slashes, while the phonetic are transcribed between square boxes. At the phonemic underlying level, we deal with sequences of phonemes, while we deal with phonemes and their details at the phonetics. surface level. Phonemes are mental concepts of speakers, while phones are real sounds that must have been affected by rules governing appropriate pronunciation in a language. Pain is phonemic, while PH in is phonetic. At the phonemic level, we deal with distinctive sounds which may affect the meaning of the words if removed, while at the phonetic level, the meaning of the word may not be affected, though the pronunciation may be inappropriate. Therefore, redundant phonetic information such as aspiration, nasalization, lateralization, etc. are part of the phonetic system of English. Please note that phonetic information is said to be redundant because they are rule-governed and they form part of the unconscious knowledge of a first language speakers. Input, phonemic underlying level of representation, P rules. Output, phonetic surface level of representation. The underlying level of representation, UR, is the phonemic level, which is the dictionary representation of words in a sentence, while the phonetic level is the actual level at which real sounds are produced. This implies that as the UR, the word pain will be transcribed as pain between slashes. The word pain will be converted to its phonetic representation in bracket PHIN at the phonetic level. Input, phonemic underlying level of representation in slash pain, P rules, aspiration rule. Output, phonetic in bracket surface level of representation, PHIN in bracket. If you look up the pronunciation of a word in a dictionary, you will find it is normally given in phonemic transcription. In this type of transcription, an English word like pain is transcribed P long short IN, pain in brackets, not PHIN. This is because the segment is PH and is an allophonic variant of the phoneme. Phoneme P, and as such has no place in a phonemic transcription. ITQ, what results when A phoneme is substituted for another, B, a phone is substituted for another. ITA, A, the meaning changes, B, the pronunciation changes, but the meaning remains the same. You must have noticed that there are phonological rules between the two levels of representation. We can then ask the question, why do we need rules? We need rules to link the two levels of representation, phonemic underlying level and phonetic surface level. We also need the rules to show when a particular allophone should show up at the surface. Int, the underlying phonemic level of representation consists of sounds as we know them, as they abstractly are in our mind. The surface phonetic level of representation consists of sounds as we speak and hear them. Summary of study section 4. In this lecture, we have learned that the term generative was first introduced into linguistics from mathematics by Noam Chomsky in 1957 and later in 1967, and that generative phonology is a reaction to classical phonemics. We also discussed that though generative phonology recognizes the phoneme, it disagrees with viewing the phoneme as an irreducible entity and rather sees the phoneme as a bundle of phonetic features and in consequence reducible to its phonetic features. We have discussed generative phonology as a component of generative grammar that assigns the correct phonetic representation to utterances in such a way as to reflect a native speaker's internalized grammar. We also got to know of generative phonologists such as Maurice Allais and Noam Chomsky, who were able to substantiate their claims that there were many sound processes which observable in the phonology are actually regulated by grammar and morphology rather than phonology. This, we learned, was because some sounds which do not share phonetics relationships relate in other contexts, as in the example of high and high in divine, divine, and divinity. In addition, we discussed that generative phonology recognizes two levels for sounds, which are the underlying phonological forms, where phonemes are located, and the physically observable surface, strings of sounds that we hear. There are phones, real sounds. We substantiated our discussion by noting that one of the best known generative phonological treatments in English is the book The Sound Patterns of English, written by Chomsky and Alley in 1968. We went further to note that the generative approach to phonology made an impact on the general view on phonology because it made phonology to become more technical. We identified the crucial components of generative phonology as the level of phonological representation, phonological rules, derivations, and distinctive features. Some of the characteristics of P rules is that they delete, insert, or change segments, or change the features of segments. We must not forget that distinctive features make it possible to capture the generalities of phonological rules. We conclude the discussion by explaining that we need rules to link the two levels of representation and to show when a particular allophone should show up at the surface. End of study section 4. Thanks for listening.